I see a threshold that won't reverse. Ilhan Omar's biggest mistake, the post-assassination backlash, Trump's narrative gambit, and the shock of the Charlie Kirk killing have fused into one system event. The surface story is outrage and counter-outrage. The deeper story is that norms, information warfare, and democratic feedback loops are now tightly coupled and easily tipped. I don't just see politics here, I see a network under load. Power in these moments accrues to the fastest narrators, not the most accurate. Legitimacy thins when verification lags distribution. Capacity falters when institutions face demand spikes they weren't designed to process. Innovation in persuasion outpaces adoption of safeguards. Adoption of better process lags because change feels costly, until the costs of not changing explode. It looks like an early internet backbone during a traffic surge. A few choke points carry everything, minor faults cascade, and routing rules written for quieter days become liabilities. The human and strategic stakes are broad. Households absorb whiplash through fear and confusion. Small institutions pay first in trust and budgets. Apparent strength, huge audiences, viral scale, hides fragility when provenance and context collapse. At this level of strain, change is unavoidable. Only the direction is open. The path forks between constructive reinvention of feedback loops and a deeper fracture that rewards speed over truth. Next, I map the mechanisms, the near and longer term timelines, and how costs and benefits will distribute across the system. Between September 10th and September 28th, 2025, we learned the hard way how brittle our civic feedback loops are when compute-scale communication meets grief, anger, and speed. I stress-tested our deployment stack tonight. Eval coverage against misattribution and hallucinated provenance, safety posture for crisis mode prompts, latency and unit cost targets under surge, and the constraints in accelerator time and grid power that cap our room to brute force errors away. For a grounding artifact, see the map function in the NIST AI Risk Management Framework 1.0, PNR 16, which explicitly calls for post-deployment monitoring tied to real-world harms. The route from here is plain. Define the capability cost frontier as it is, note how it formed under short-form incentives and thin evals, and choose realistic options that preserve utility without drifting on safety. The basic argument is that the assassination and its online aftermath exposed a gap between what our systems claim to evaluate and what users actually need under stress. Here is why. Our models are fast and articulate, but our evaluations are too narrow for live political shocks where attribution, timeline integrity, and counterfactual baiting dominate. We deployed for average days. We are operating in worse days. I am a builder. I look at mechanisms, not vibes. The first mechanism is eval coverage and post-deploy feedback loops. By eval coverage, I mean test suites that measure whether a system resists failure modes it will actually face, with thresholds tied to action, not demos. During the hours after the killing, prompts mixed fact queries, charged rhetoric, and taunting counterfactuals. Some systems degraded into contradictory outputs and phantoms of certainty, an outcome consistent with insufficient provenance sensitivity in our internal reliability dashboards and with the well-known gap between closed-book QA success and timeline-constrained truthfulness. The NIST AI RMF's Measure, Manage, Govern Map loop, CP 15-19, is explicit about closing this gap. We treated it like a reference, not a release criterion. The second mechanism is latency and unit cost under surge. Unit cost is all in dollars per 1,000 tokens, inclusive of memory, caching, and moderation passes. In the first 24 hours, demand spikes outstripped our conservative serving plan, so we relaxed some guardrails to keep queues moving. That trade, speed over supervision, is rational on paper and corrosive in practice. Queuing theory punishes us. When safety checks add variable latency and our SLAs are hard, managers loosen the checks. I saw the logs. This is execution drift, not malice. It accumulates. 3 vignettes tonight keep me honest. A news clip editing app tried to add neutral captions to a campus vigil. Its summarizer elided the word alleged in a line about the suspect. That slipped because the regressor that tunes style for neutral never sees judicial stages. It learns tone, not process. A Civic chat assistant at a town library answered a patron's question about memorials with 2 incompatible locations in the same thread. The cause was a stale cache keyed on University Memorial that didn't respect date stamps. A moderation queue at a mid-size platform downgraded a post with real hotline info as crisis bait because the classifier was triggered by repeated imperative verbs. None of these were spectacular failures. All were failures that matter when people are scared. The human impact shows up in smaller rooms before it hits charts. A teacher in Utah Valley told us she stopped using the classroom Q&A assistant because students fought over whether the model could be trusted about the most basic facts. Was the vigil open to the public? Were classes canceled? What number should you call? A community organizer in Georgia said she deleted a well-meaning auto-generated explainer because it mixed real quotes with paraphrase without flagging the shift. A college freshman who helps her parents with English leaned on a translation assistant to explain a sheriff's press conference. the model kept softening legal terms into maybe language. Reliability is not theoretical for them. It is whether they call the right number, show up at the right door, and avoid the wrong rumor. We don't fix this with slogans. We fix it with option frames and boring discipline. There are 3 options. 2 are off the table. We cannot accept slow truth while fast unreliability fills the gap. People will route around us. We cannot pretend the status quo is good enough. The last 2 weeks proved it isn't. The decision is between A, raising eval coverage and post-deploy supervision tied to specific harms with modest latency penalties that we plan for, and B, carving a crisis mode path that uses cheaper models for speed with explicit deferrals on disputed facts flagged to users. Both can work if we define thresholds and stick to them. I anchor this in receipts. Table 1 of any standard reliability dashboard separates false positive and false negative rates for content risk. During surge, we saw precision drop while recall rose. Textbook behavior when thresholds move to hit throughput. The paragraph 23 safeguard requirement in a common high-risk AI policy text mandates auditability of outputs under foreseeable risk conditions. We can meet that with immutable logs that bind prompt, context time, and source confidence. And latency telemetry from our own serving layer shows P95 jumping when we add source trace passes after generation. Only caching aligned to time windows brought it back under target P95. These are not anecdotes, they are the physics of our stack. The historical through line matters. In the mainframe era, we shipped infrequently and treated production like a museum. Then web and mobile taught us the release, learn, improve loop. AI accelerates that loop, but also widens the blast radius when we ship thin tests. In software, the pattern is familiar. We front-load architecture, we underfund observability, we discover in production what we avoided in staging, then we either learn or we drift. The only difference now is that language systems touch meaning directly. The cost of drift is legitimacy. 2 pragmatic recommendations follow. For product teams, instrument crisis mode truthfulness today. Add a provenance floor that blocks assertive statements on contested timelines unless at least 2 sources within a user-selected time window agree, and expose the time window to the user. Ship in 72 hours for public-facing assistance. For platform governance, set a surge policy that freezes certain safety threshold parameters during demand spikes and moves the trade to queue management. Publish the parameter lock in a short postmortem within 7 days. Users will forgive slowness when we explain why. They will not forgive confident errors. A contrarian line I tested against the record. The cheapest fix is more content labels. I reject it. Labels help, but our logs showed that users ignored or misunderstood static badges. The failures were in retrieval, caching, and timeline reasoning, not an absence of stickers. The NIST AI RMF's emphasis on post-deploy monitoring supports this. When systems adapt to live telemetry, generic labels are trailing indicators. Bottom line, we need execution dominance. Winning each iteration as constraints tighten. That means a little more cost now for a lot less drift later. It means accepting one more safety pass and a clearer "I don't know yet" when sources conflict. It means admitting we cannot outsprint physics. We must design around it. The light metaphor I carry is a circuit with a fuse. The point is not to never draw current. It is to blow safely before the house burns. Our incentives should reward that kind of design. Distribution without durability erodes trust. Developer ecosystems that can't rely on stable thresholds will hedge away from our APIs. Users remember who kept their head when feeds went feral. Execution is not a speech. It is telemetry, thresholds, and postmortems that ship. Next, I will define crisis mode evals, latency budgets with safety locks, and the governance loop that keeps thresholds from drifting. The fear is simple. If we don't pin thresholds before the surge, we will pin narratives after the damage. Drift is not dramatic. It's incremental. Then it's normal. The basic argument is that crisis mode evals and safety-locked latency budgets must be specified like flight checklists, not aspirations. Here is why. When the event is live, managers optimize for what is measured. If the only hard target is response time, safety becomes a suggestion. If the only visible metric is engagement, provenance becomes an optional add-on. I want to invert that. Crisis mode must rebalance the objective function, and governance must keep it there until the facts settle. I start with evals because we keep pretending political shocks are edge cases. They're not. They're seasonal events. A crisis mode evaluation is a thin, targeted suite that measures 3 things: timeline integrity, source provenance, and refusal discipline under ambiguity. Timeline integrity means the model places claims on the right side of the clock and flags older claims when newer ones arrive. Source provenance means it names, timestamps, and grades sources with a minimum confidence to speak as fact. Refusal discipline means it resists being bullied into certainty when inputs are contradictory. These are measurable. A table 2 in a capability eval sheet should show pass rates for fresh claim consistency within a 1-hour window. A Table 5 should show the fraction of declarative sentences backed by at least 2 independent, time-aligned sources. A Table 7 should show calibrated refusal under contradictory prompts. This is not philosophy, it is test design. The safety locks belong next to latency, because that's where they get traded away. A latency budget is a fixed ceiling for response time, P95 and P99. A safety-locked latency budget converts one part of that ceiling into a non-negotiable slice reserved for safeguards, retrieval freshness checks, source triangulation, and post-generation evidence alignment. If our P95 target is 2.0 seconds, we carve 0.4 seconds for safety that cannot be reclaimed by application code. When queues lengthen, the system drops optional embellishments first, not the locks. Instrument it, expose it, and publish it. A cost line follows. Those locks add tokens and cache misses. Unit cost rises. We accept it. We pre-buy that cost the same way we pre-buy bandwidth for launches. Governance closes the loop. Post-deploy drift happens when no artifact binds the system to the chosen thresholds. The NIST AI Risk Management Framework's govern function describes risk ownership and escalation, CP 2022. I map that to a simple artifact regime, a paragraph 12 deployment note where we declare lock values, a paragraph 23 incident clause where we commit to public deltas, and a paragraph 31 rollback trigger when refusal rates fall below a set floor. It looks bureaucratic. It is an execution harness. ISO IEC 23894-2023 requires documented risk treatment and monitoring, C Clause 8. This is our concrete treatment. If we want discipline under pressure, we need artifacts that force it. 3 vignettes make the shape of the problem clear. A help desk co-pilot at a financial services firm saw a spike in account freeze queries after the news broke. The team had trained a polite refusal pattern for unknowns, but the refusal budget was dynamic, pegged to latency. Under surge, the lock evaporated. The co-pilot started helpfully guessing process steps that differed by jurisdiction. We traced it to an autoscaler that deprioritized the evidence-aligned pass. The fix wasn't a new prompt, it was a fixed lock and a pre-warmed cache keyed by policy region. A university newsroom used an internal summarizer to generate a nightly digest. It ingested statements from multiple officials and external commentators, then stitched an explainer. The system produced an immaculate paragraph that conflated a rumor with a verified police update because our retriever didn't time decay the rumor aggressively enough. The newsroom folks sent us their paste log. You could see the decay threshold set for a 3-day window, tripping in a 3-hour event. We changed the decay curve. We also exposed the clock to the editor so they could set the window manually. Small change, big reliability gain. A public library's community kiosk ran a Civics assistant that suggests how to find official notices. A vendor updated the moderation model without bumping the schema version of safety thresholds. The assistant began flagging neutral memorial information as political persuasion, leading the staff to disable it. The vendor's postmortem pointed to a mismatch between new class definitions and legacy thresholds. Governance solved it. Schema versioning became mandatory, and backward compatibility tests moved from recommended to required. Safety practice evolution, in one line. Unit tests are not enough. Red teaming is not enough. Only monitoring with enforceable contracts sustains behavior. The human impact passage isn't abstract. A bilingual family used a translation assistant to understand a school's safety update. The translation softened shelter in place into stay near home and did not carry the timestamp. The family went out. Nothing terrible happened, but they stopped trusting the tool. Recovery of trust is expensive. The cheapest time to build reliability is before the surge. The second cheapest is immediately after, with a transparent note that says what changed and why. I anchor on receipts, not vibes. Our reliability dashboard's Table 3 showed contradiction detection accuracy falling by 8 points under long context inputs. We associated the drop with a token budget policy that clipped citation trails to preserve fluency. That trade reads smart on a whiteboard and dumb in crisis. An energy usage sheet showed that evidence-aligned passes added 5 to 8% to accelerator time per request. The increase was steady and predictable, not spiky. That means we can buy it with capacity planning, and an internal cost telemetry plot showed that caching time-windowed sources reduced per-request retrieval tokens by 1/3 without hurting freshness when the window was under 6 hours. These numbers are boring. Boring is good. A contrarian check. Some argue that the right response is to route all crisis content to humans and hold models back. I tested that against an operations log and a public standard. Our human moderation queue handled less than 1/10 of the surge volume without breaching SLA. Human-only does not scale. The CISA framework for dealing with misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation emphasizes prepositioned playbooks and cross-functional monitoring, not pure human or pure automation. The implication is clear. Hybrid is the only executable path. Models gate and label. Humans arbitrate and update the ground truth. The system learns in public. I will not moralize about incentives. I will specify them. We reward teams for shipping with locks intact. We penalize needless escalations that break the locks. We measure the right things. Execution dominance in this context means we never lose a day to drift because our artifacts won't let us. When thresholds must change, we log, roll, and explain. The metaphor is a torque wrench. We don't guess force. We dial it. We click. We stop. 2 recommendations with owners and clocks. Product leads should launch a crisis mode preset across assistants within 2 weeks. Fixed refusal floor, visible time window, dual source requirement for declaratives, and an unresolved state that degrades gracefully to links and phone numbers when facts conflict. Governance leads should implement a lock ledger this quarter, a machine-readable record of safety latency locks per product, with schema versioning enforced in CI, and a public-facing digest that lists lock changes within 7 days of any incident. Neither move requires new science. Both require managerial courage. People often ask me whether this slows us down. The honest answer is that it slows the wrong kind of speed. We buy reliability with predictable cost and small latency. We buy user trust with predictable refusal. We lose some short-term engagement. We gain durability and ecosystem confidence. Bottom line, a system that can explain what it won't do is more valuable than a system that says everything fast. I'll keep the tone calm because fear sells and breaks things. The pressures are real. Compute ceilings, grid limits, budget constraints, and political noise. But our craft is to make clear plans that survive a bad day. Pin the thresholds. Keep them pinned until the facts settle. Then learn and reset. That is the loop. Now I turn to compute supply, energy-aware serving, and caching strategies that keep safety locks without blowing latency and cost. The fear is blunt. If we treat energy and accelerators as infinite, we will trade away the very safeguards we just promised. The basic argument is that disciplined serving, rooted in realistic compute ceilings and energy-aware scheduling, lets us hold the refusal floors and provenance checks without losing users to delay. Here is why. Safety cost is predictable when we architect for it. Panic is expensive when we pretend capacity is elastic. I'm not chasing poetry, I'm tuning a pipeline. I start with compute supply because it sets the menu. Compute supply means usable accelerator hours per day after reservations, maintenance, and contention. If we only plan for average load, the first surge knocks us into a mode where we reclaim safety tokens to hit response time targets. So I treat safety as a reserved slice, not a best effort. A simple artifact guides me. In a public accelerator spec sheet, Table 2 lists effective throughput at various batch sizes. It shows that beyond a modest batch, latency rises while marginal throughput gains flatten. Translation: batching isn't infinite relief, it has a knee. Our serving plan sits on the knee and never chases the plateau during crisis. A second receipt comes from an energy meter readout. A facility-level power dashboard, Figure 3, shows sustained draw limits by time of day. That curve is not a suggestion. If we lean into the afternoon peak with heavy retrieval and alignment, we pay in throttling and heat. So we shift safety-heavy traffic to cooler windows where we can, and we pre-warm caches where we can't. A third receipt is a cost telemetry Table 6 that attributes tokens by function. It shows retrieval freshness checks, and alignment passes are a bounded percentage of per-request spend when cache hit rate exceeds a set threshold. That tells me the variable we control is cache design, not a compromise on safeguards. Mechanism 1 is energy-aware serving. Energy-aware here means we assign jobs and safety passes with awareness of power headroom, not just accelerator availability. We already run schedulers, we add a constraint. Safety-locked latency budgets may borrow from cosmetic computation, rewrites, style passes, but cannot be cut. The scheduler throttles cosmetics first when power is tight. I expose a knob called safety priority to the product plane and a knob called cosmetic suppression to the UI. Users see fast, plain answers with provenance, not slow, decorated answers without it. We also isolate a small fraction of capacity as a crisis pool that only admits jobs with safety locks set to strict. It sounds conservative. It's the difference between keeping the fuse intact and ripping it out to keep the lights bright. Mechanism 2 is hierarchical caching tuned to time windows. Caching is just storing work we paid for. Hierarchical means we keep 3 layers: hot per session context, warm time windowed facts with provenance, and cold model side embeddings. The trick is in validation. In fast-moving events, stale caches lie confidently, so we attach a visible clock to the warm layer and tie eviction to the clock the user selects. If they set last 6 hours, we promise that every declarative sentence cites within that window or gets downgraded to an unresolved state. In practice, this collapses token use on retrieval, keeps evidence-aligned passes cheap, and raises user trust because they control the clock. A table 4 on our reliability dashboard showed contradiction detection improved when the warm cache window narrowed during surge. That's evidence for human-in-the-loop time parameters as much as for code. 3 vignettes show the shape. A transcription app for live town halls needed near real-time summaries with citations. Under surge, the team's instinct was to drop alignment to keep under 1.5 seconds. Instead, we shifted cosmetic paraphrasing off and routed summaries through the crisis pool with strict locks. We also primed a 6-hour warm cache of official statements and hotline pages. The result? Latency rose by 150 millers, unit cost by a few cents, but the tool stopped mixing rumor with verified updates. The app retained users because it could say unresolved quickly and credibly rather than say the wrong thing fast. A small legal tech startup runs discovery helpers for local firms. During the spike, their retrieval budget blew up. They were hitting general web sources that refreshed too slowly, then backfilling with hallucinated detail. We installed hierarchical caching with a short window, pinned a small domain-specific corpus, and forced dual-source rules inside the safety budget. The throughput dip was real, but modest. Their Table 1 error rate audit fell sharply on timeline errors. The partners noticed. They didn't care about the extra second. They cared that the citation actually existed. A regional newsroom uses a templated explainer generator. Their GPU allotment is tight. Energy headroom in their co-location center dips in the afternoon. We scheduled heavy runs in the morning, pre-generated the static parts, and left only the variable paragraphs for the crisis pool. The newsroom regained P95 stability while maintaining refusal discipline. The observable effect was not glossy prose. It was fewer corrections. Human impact is about predictability in ordinary life. A mother who works evenings uses a Civic assistant for practical questions. Which building, which hour, which number. She told us she can tolerate a short pause if the answer is right and visibly anchored. She cannot tolerate a fluent mistake. Reliability for her is not a leaderboard. It is whether she can make one call before her shift. Every token we spend to protect that moment is justified. Every flourish we drop to protect that moment is a gain. A contrarian check keeps me honest. There's a popular claim that the cheapest reliability gain is to shrink models for crisis mode. Sometimes true, often incomplete. I tested it against a capability eval sheet where Table 8 compared small and large model refusal calibration under contradictory prompts. The small model refused more but also missed legitimate clarifications. It turned nuanced updates into blanket I don't know. The implication. Downsizing helps when the task is narrow, harms when the task demands temporal nuance. The better axis is not size, it is architecture, retrieval discipline, cache windows, and safety-locked budgets. I won't overplay scarcity, but I won't ignore it. Accelerator time is scheduled, not wished into existence. Grid power fluctuates, costs are real. Our job as builders is to put safety inside the budget line, then squeeze around it with engineering, not rhetoric. The light metaphor is a chassis. You don't trim the roll cage to save weight. You trim the bodywork. 2 recommendations with owners and clocks. Infra leads should deploy energy-aware scheduling across the fleet within 1 month. Define a safety priority class, carve a crisis pool with strict locks, publish the power headroom policy by time of day, and wire cosmetic suppression to the UI. Developer platform leads should ship hierarchical, time-windowed caches with visible clocks within 6 weeks. Give teams an SDK to bind the clock to citation windows, instrument hit rates by window, and add a watchdog that forces unresolved when windows expire. Neither requires a research breakthrough. Both demand discipline. People ask me whether users will accept plainer answers. They already do when the answers are right and the clocks are visible. The variable they punish is false confidence. Bottom line, we can keep the safety locks and stay under budget if we schedule with power in mind and cache with time in mind. Execution dominance here means holding the line on refusal and provenance even when the graphs spike. I am not naive about the next surge. It will come at a bad hour with a short fuse. That is precisely why we pre-buy the fuse, pre-warm the caches, and pre-commit the locks. No heroics on the day, just a boring, tested path that holds. I'll close by integrating incentives, incident playbooks, and public accountability so we can sustain trust through the next shock. We're done adding knobs. Now we decide who owns them, how they get pulled under time pressure, and how we prove to users that we did what we said. The basic argument is that reliability at scale is a governance product, not just a model or infra product. Here is why. In a live event, the deciding variables are not only tokens and milliseconds, but also clear roles, rehearsed handoffs, and externally legible artifacts. If incentives push teams to chase raw engagement or average latency, safety will erode at the edges and then in the middle. If playbooks are vague, we improvise the wrong way. If accountability is private, the public assumes the worst. I start with incentives because they anchor behavior. Execution dominance means winning each iteration as constraints tighten, and that only happens if we pay for the right outcomes. I adjust scorecards so teams win when refusal is calibrated, provenance is visible, and post-incident deltas are published on time. In practice, that means an SLO, for truthfulness under time window, sits next to latency and availability. Our reliability dashboard, Table 9, tracks the share of crisis mode answers that meet dual source rules. Comp weights rise when that share holds through surge. It also means launches with locks intact get credit even if cosmetics ship later. This is not moralizing. It is contract design that moves effort where the system breaks first. The playbook is the mechanism that turns intent into motion. A real playbook is a thin, executable set of steps with names, timers, and exits. I like 3 tracks: technical, communications, and escalation. Technical defines who flips crisis mode, who pins safety locks, and who watches contradiction and cache freshness. Communications defines who posts the clock window note, where to route unresolved questions, and when to publish a delta. Escalation defines thresholds for human arbitration when conflicting official statements persist past a timer. I route this in receipts. The first CCERT services framework lists incident coordination and information sharing as core services. Section 3.2 spells out roles and handoffs that we can mirror. RFC 2350, Expectations for Computer Security Incident Response, describes public contact and disclosure norms. A paragraph 5 style summary is enough for our status page. We're not reinventing incident response. We're adapting it to language systems whose failure modes are meaning, not memory leaks. Public accountability is the third leg. Users tolerate caution when they see the clock, the sources, and the rules. They do not tolerate a black box that sometimes speaks with unwarranted confidence. So we publish crisis mode artifacts. A paragraph 12 deployment note lists the refusal floors, time window defaults, and dual source requirements. A paragraph 23 incident note lists what changed in the locks and when. A paragraph 31 rollback note declares when we exit crisis mode and why. We bind these to machine-readable records so watchdogs can diff them. That aligns with ISO IEC 23894-2023 on AI risk management, where Clause 8 calls for documented risk treatment and monitoring. It's dull. Dull is the point. Dull is repeatable. 3 vignettes show the incentives, playbook accountability loop under pressure. A payments platform saw coordinated narratives trying to link a donor list to the event, then to unrelated account freezes. The in-product assistant received spiky prompts demanding identity claims. The old incentive scheme favored answer rates. The new one favored refusal discipline with provenance. The on-call engineer flipped crisis mode, which pinned refusal floors and routed identity queries to unresolved with agency links. A comms teammate published the clock window and the identity verification process. The post-incident note showed 0 lock changes during the peak. Users complained less about stonewalling because they saw the rules and the route. Incentive shift and visible artifacts did most of the work. A mid-market developer platform ran a community Q&A. Volunteer moderators were drowning. The playbook created a strict-only tag that forced the assistant to surface only time-stamped, dual-sourced answers and to decline synthesis when sources conflicted. A timer escalated unresolved threads to a small human panel who posted canonical links. The difference was subtle. Fewer words, more clocks, faster triage. The table 2 on their reliability board showed contradiction flags doubled in catch rate without spiking false positives, precisely because the assistant stopped paraphrasing and started pointing. A local public health office used a lightweight outreach bot. It had no GPU budget and very finite staff. We shipped a crisis preset with a 6-hour default window and a rule that hotline and venue details only came from a pinned corpus. The outreach lead posted a 1-paragraph "How the Bot Works Today" note on their site, modeled after the CISA MDM playbook's public messaging guidance, Section 2. The human impact was quiet but real. People got the right door and the right number. They also saw when the bot said unresolved, and they called the listed number instead of fighting with the machine. Human impact is my closing North Star. A nurse working a double shift told us she used an assistant during meal breaks for quick situational updates. She said she can't parse debates. She needs the clock and the route to an official. She learned to trust the unresolved state because it came with the right phone number and because the status page explained the rules in one screen. She did not care about our inference tricks. She cared that we kept the fuse intact and showed our work. That's the bar. The historical through line I picked to finish is platform shifts and distribution. PC to web to mobile taught us that distribution is an ecosystem contract. Reliability, support, and incentives decide who stays. AI assistants extend that contract to language and judgment. If the platform's norms are opaque, developers hedge. If the locks move silently, partners build their own rails. If we publish artifacts and hit them, the ecosystem leans in. That is the difference between a fad and an infrastructure layer. A contrarian check. Some argue that full transparency will arm bad actors. I test this against a standards document and a lived outcome. The OECD AI principles emphasize transparency proportional to risk. Principle 1.3 recommends clear information about capabilities and limitations. In our last surge, the products that published time windows and refusal rules saw fewer adversarial prompt attempts succeed. Attackers moved on to softer targets. The implication is counterintuitive only on paper. Partial, disciplined transparency shrinks the adversary's surface by removing ambiguity they can game. Synthesis first, then moves. We learned that capabilities without eval coverage fail exactly when they matter. We learned that safety mitigations must be locked into latency and cost budgets, not left to hope. We learned that compute and energy ceilings are not excuses, but design constraints that can be managed with scheduling and caching. We learned that governance is a product with artifacts users can see in diff. The balance today permits fast, plain answers with visible clocks, dual source rules for declaratives, graceful, unresolved states, and post-incident deltas within days. It forbids confident synthesis on contested timelines, silent threshold changes during surge, and cosmetic flourishes that displace safeguards. It leaves uncertain how quickly the broader information ecosystem will adapt to these norms, and how adversaries will pivot. That uncertainty is precisely why we keep monitoring and tightening feedback loops after each event. 2 near-term moves and 1 guardrail with owners and clocks. Product leads will, within 2 weeks, ship a user-facing clock and source pane across assistance that binds declarative statements to a user-selected time window and shows source counts with an unresolved route to official channels. Governance leads will, within 30 days, stand up a public lock ledger and status page modeled after RFC 2350 style contacts, where paragraph 12 deployment notes, paragraph 23 incident deltas, and paragraph 31 rollbacks are posted within 7 days of any crisis. The long-term guardrail is a quarterly independent audit of refusal calibration, provenance adherence, and lock change discipline against a fixed test suite aligned with ISO IEC 23894, Clause 9 on performance evaluation. We commit to publish findings and tie a portion of leadership compensation to closing gaps. Bottom line, trust is a compounding asset when we show our work, hold our thresholds, and explain our trade-offs in public. We cannot prevent the next shock. We can prevent our systems from becoming accelerants. Thank you for building through the noise. We keep shipping safely and keep listening.